They told her she was just a face. The most beautiful woman in the world, they called her, and they meant it as the whole of her. A decoration, something to be lit and photographed and sold. What they didn't want you to know, what Hollywood spent decades making sure you'd never hear, is that the woman they reduced to a magazine cover held a patent for the invention that would one day carry your voice, your messages, your entire digital life through the air. Her name was Hedy Lamarr, and the technology she helped invent in 1941 is, right now, in the device you're using to watch this. Let's go back. Before the studios, before the fame, before the carefully managed silence, she was born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna in 1914. A bright, restless child who took apart her music box at 5 years old just to see how the mechanism worked, then put it back together. Her father, a banker, would walk the city streets with her and explain how things functioned, how a streetcar moved, how a printing press stamped its ink. She listened. She remembered. The seed of an engineer was planted in a little girl that the world would only ever want to look at. By her late teens, she was acting. By her early 20s, she was infamous. Married off to one of the wealthiest arms dealers in Austria, a man named Fritz Mandl, who controlled her completely. He didn't want a wife so much as a possession he could display at dinner parties. And those dinner parties, this is the part they leave out, were attended by generals, engineers, weapons manufacturers, men who talked freely about torpedoes and guidance systems and military technology. Because surely the beautiful young wife sitting silently at the end of the table couldn't understand a word of it. She understood all of it. She sat through those conversations, absorbing the language of military engineering, filing away everything she heard about how weapons were controlled, how signals were sent, where the weaknesses lay. And then, in 1937, she did something that took extraordinary nerve. She drugged her maid, disguised herself in the woman's uniform, and fled. Some say she slipped out a window. Some say she walked straight out the front door. Either way, she escaped a gilded cage and made her way to London, and from London to Hollywood, carrying with her a head full of secrets that the men around that dinner table never imagined she'd kept. Hollywood, of course, saw exactly what Mandl had seen: a face. Louis B. Mayer signed her, renamed her Hedy Lamarr, and built a career on her image. She became one of the biggest stars of the era. But here's what the cameras never captured. At night, after the shoots, Hedy Lamarr went home and she invented. She kept a drafting table in her house. She sketched ideas. She tried to design a better traffic light, a tablet that would turn water into a carbonated drink. The studio knew. They didn't care. An inventing actress didn't sell tickets, so they kept that part of her in the dark where it couldn't complicate the product they were selling. Then came the war. In 1940, German U-boats were sinking Allied ships in the Atlantic, and among the dead were civilians, including children fleeing the conflict by sea. Lamarr read the reports, and she couldn't look away. The Allies had radio-controlled torpedoes, but they had a fatal flaw. The enemy could find the single radio frequency the torpedo was listening to and jam it, sending the weapon off course or shutting it down entirely. A torpedo that could be jammed was a torpedo that missed, and missed torpedoes meant more sunken ships. She had an idea. What if the signal didn't stay on one frequency? What if the transmitter and the receiver both jumped, constantly, rapidly, from frequency to frequency, in a sequence only they knew? An enemy listening in would hear nothing but fragments. Bursts of noise scattered across the spectrum, impossible to lock onto, impossible to jam. To work, the torpedo and the controller had to hop in perfect synchronization, switching channels dozens of times in a way that looked to anyone outside like pure chaos. The concept was brilliant. The problem was making the two devices stay in sync. The answer came from an unlikely partner. an avant-garde composer named George Antheil, a man who had once orchestrated a performance using 16-player pianos programmed to play in eerie coordination. Lamar realized that the same mechanism that synchronized those automated pianos, a punched paper roll, could synchronize the frequency hops between a transmitter and a torpedo. Two identical rolls, one in each device, telling them when to jump and where. Music and weaponry, fused by a movie star and a composer at a kitchen table. In 1941, they filed the patent. It was granted in August of 1942 under the name Hetty Kiesler Markey, her married name at the time, and George Antheil. They called it a secret communication system. They handed it freely to the United States Navy, and the Navy buried it. This is the moment the story should have turned. Instead, it stalled. The Navy looked at the invention, looked at the woman who'd brought it, and dismissed it. The official reasoning was that the mechanism was too cumbersome to fit inside a torpedo, though the design was no more complex than a player piano, which had been working fine for decades. But there was another current beneath the surface. They reportedly suggested that if Hetty Lamar really wanted to help the war effort, she'd be more useful selling war bonds with her face than filing patents with her mind. So that's what they let her do. She sold war bonds, and she was extraordinary at it, raising millions of dollars by trading kisses for purchases. The press adored it, the beautiful actress doing her patriotic part. It was, in a way, the perfect cover story. It kept everyone looking at exactly what they'd always looked at, while the real contribution sat locked in a filing cabinet, classified and forgotten. The patent expired in 1959. Hetty Lamar never made a single dollar from it. But here's what they couldn't bury forever. The idea was too good to stay dead. In the decades that followed, as her patent gathered dust, engineers began to rediscover the principle of frequency hopping, what we now call spread spectrum technology. It surfaced in military communications during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It became the secure backbone of Cold War transmissions. And then, as the world went digital, that same core idea, splitting a signal and scattering it across many frequencies so it can't be jammed, intercepted, or crowded out, became the foundation of the wireless technologies that now define modern life. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, the cellular signal in your pocket. All of them are descendants of a concept that a Hollywood actress and an experimental composer sketched out to sink U-boats in 1941. For most of her life, almost no one knew. Hetty Lamar's later years were difficult and largely private. The woman who'd given the world one of its most valuable ideas lived out of the spotlight, her scientific legacy unacknowledged. It wasn't until 1997, when she was 82 years old, that the Electronic Frontier Foundation finally honored her with an award recognizing her contribution. When they called to tell her, her response was simple. She said, "It's about time." She died in the year 2000, and only after her death did the full scale of what she'd done begin to reach the public. The recognition, the documentaries, the slow correction of a record that had been deliberately incomplete for 60 years. In 2014, she was inducted, posthumously, into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Now think about why it took so long. It wasn't that the evidence was hidden in some impossible vault. The patent was public. Her name was on it. The story was sitting there the entire time, waiting for anyone to connect it. What buried Hetty Lamar wasn't a conspiracy of locked doors. It was something quieter and more powerful. A decision made over and over by the people who profited from her image. That a woman that beautiful could only be one thing. That her mind was a footnote. That the world wanted the face and nothing else. They were wrong. And the proof is in your hand right now, humming invisibly through the air, connecting you to everything. Built on the buried idea of a woman they only ever wanted you to look at. So the next time someone tells you what a person is, that they're just a pretty face, just an athlete, just an entertainer, just one thing. Remember the actress who sat silent at a dinner table full of generals, listening. Remember the woman who fled a tyrant in a stolen uniform. Remember that the signal carrying these very words to you exists because somebody refused to believe she was only what they could see. Hedy Lamarr patented the future in 1941. Hollywood spent decades hoping you'd never find out. Now you know, and that's exactly what they didn't want.